So, have you ever been curious about how players can perform drifting lines such as these?
Here I come! Yeah!
Rest in peace, Zavunk, you will be missed. Anyways, so what do I mean by driving lines and drifting lines, things of that nature? So, the big thing with Line Racing Crossworlds is that driving in this game isn't just about actually driving. There is a few other factors, such as if you're going to have an item in your inventory that you got to use to block something, are you potentially going to have to realign because someone shoved you due to desync, or is there something else that's coming into the mix, such as is there a KBB, and there's now KBB pillars? There's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. Now, one of the biggest things with driving and drifting lines is you have to understand when to start your drifting line and when to realign your drifting line. Now, saying that, it sounds weird. It doesn't make any sense. What do you mean realign? Well, the big thing is that a lot of players, especially when it comes to lower level players, and I don't mean this to be rude, but a lot of players do not start their lines in correct spots, or they start them either too late or too early, which makes it to where their lines are a little wonky. Now, granted, this game has a lot of leniency with when you start your lines and things of that nature, but you know what? Let's go into a track real quick, and let me explain this through the use of using a power car setup, just like I used in the intro of the video. So this power car setup is going to have 31 handling, and there's a good reason for this, because 31 handling is pretty bad overall. Let's move into a track such as Wonder Museum. I think this is a perfect track to explain what cornering and things of that nature should look like. Going into Wonder Museum, one of the big things with drifting lines is you need to understand when you have to start your drifts and when you need to start turning inwards. So a lot of this game's drifting lines and things of that nature actually come down to your speed. So when you lose speed, you start turning a lot better, but when you have higher speed, it makes it harder to make a lot of turns, unless you have much higher handling. So this is something that you have to keep in mind when you're making your drifting lines and your driving lines. So like right up here at this turn, so I'll pop a level 2, but I'll go wide first initially. And because I'm slower, you see how I'm able to take that turn perfectly? This is the thing, this is something you have to keep in mind when you're driving, is that with power cars, because they drive slower when they're drifting, they get a massive advantage on cornering and turning that other vehicles don't, because remember, having lower speed means you can take better lines. Now, this is also a double-edged sword, because going slower also means your opponents will go faster and can overtake you on your lines or even get within slipstream range. So it's something you do have to keep in mind. So you might be wondering, how do I circumvent this then? How do I go full speed, but also keep really good drifting lines? Well, this is where the addition of things such as acceleration releasing comes into play and accel tapping. Now, granted, it's not super optimal, but there are times when utilizing it's actually the correct play. There's also the fact that you have to figure out when you need to be getting your level 3s off, because if you get your level 3s off too late, so like if I get this level 2 off late, you see how it sends me all the way to the wall? That's because momentum actually carries you when you're using drift boost. So when you're using boost, you have to release them a little bit earlier before bend, depending on if you have higher or lower handling. So with a very low handling combo such as this one, without accel releasing, since I didn't get a drift boost off to get that momentum, I'm not going to have to do anything spectacular to actually overcome that. But let's say I go over to this next turn here. Let's say I charge up a level 2, and I release it, and now I try to course correct. You see how it slams me into a wall? That's because I tried to course correct my line, and it didn't work. And you see, the moment you incorrectly do a line, now everything starts fumbling or falling apart, because now all your lines from there have to be either readjusted on the fly, or you got to slow down to realign yourself. This is a very big thing, is knowing when to release your drifts. This is also part of driving lines and drifting lines. So like right here, even though I want to release this drift, I actually physically cannot, because if I release it there, I will go to the wall. So same thing here. Even if I wanted to release this drift, I can't really physically do that, and so I need to accel release because I started my drifting line late. And this is something that you have to keep in mind, because you can't just go and do a super tight line like that with 30 handling. You have to be aligned for it. So keep in mind, when you're on lower handling, you need to start your lines a little bit wider and a little bit earlier than normal. This is how you can actually start taking those better lines that I showcased during laps 1 and 2. Now, if you want to take better lines without actually succumbing to using acceleration releasing, there is the potential that you can just use a handling car setup. When it comes to having higher handling, one major thing when it comes to higher handling in general is the fact that you are able to take lines in a much better way. Well, better as in you can take lines much later and start your drifts much later, and you can take much tighter lines that other combos actually won't be able to. So for instance, these lines here, you can take these with higher handling, but right here, you can take this line perfectly, hold this line, and with the drift boost, you see how the drift boost in semi is so far away? That is because of higher handling. Higher handling lets you get away with releasing your drift boost a little late, and you can drift into corners such as here on roulette and dodge things. Big thing is I could release this drift boost, and even with the fact that I released that drift boost, even with the fact that I took that line really badly and started it way too close to the wall, and I'll do it again, I can still take these lines much better than the average car combo because of higher handling and having max handling. This is something that's very important. This is what allows you to get these insane drifting lines that allow you to weave in between items while maintaining a drift, things of that nature. But this is getting pretty advanced, but for the most part, when you have higher handling, you can start your drifts much later, or you can maintain these much longer, things of that nature, and you can weave around things. But for the most part, if you're trying to take better lines, you should start wide and try to go in. Now granted, these lines aren't perfect, but even for lower level players, you'll be able to learn these lines quite easily, and even if you're not taking perfect lines, such as how players like Exponzo, Kedar, Sneaky, players like these that can actually take those lines optimally all the time and snapdrift on them to min-max them, you can still take good lines and maintain slipstream people very consistently, and that's one of the biggest factors of playing online. Now in terms of time trial, min-maxing those drifting lines and learning how to snapdrift will be different, but that's besides the point. We're talking about just in general how to improve your lines from a beginner, intermediate, fundamental level, and starting to get into the better drifting lines and understanding why you might be messing up your lines. So let's run it back in Wonder Museum. So Wonder Museum with 30 handling looked pretty crazy for the most part, and it was insane that I was able to pull it off. So with 100 handling, or even just higher handling, I can take these lines, and you notice that my lines are much tighter overall, but I can also start my boost and drifts much earlier. So like right here on this bend, I can start this much earlier. I can let go of acceleration once, and now look at that line. That is how important having higher handling actually is when it comes to taking better lines and getting better lines off. And again, you remember that drift that I would pop there and it would send me flying? With higher handling, that's not how that works anymore. Now with higher handling, there's a little bit more nuance with how drifting lines work. So with drift boost specifically, let's say this. So I have this drift boost, I'm going to release it late. But you see, even with the fact that I released it late, I was still able to control it. This is where having higher handling matters quite a lot. Higher handling allows you to get away with things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And again, I'm at max handling because I only have 54 handling. Going back to Wonder Museum's spiral section, and look, that level 3, I was able to take that, and with one Excel tap, I could easily have taken that line even better. But that's how important having higher handling is, and that's what it actually allows players to take incredible lines that you otherwise wouldn't. So again, one more example. This level 3, look over acceleration, and even with that acceleration reduction, I still got all that speed from the drift boost, and I was able to still take that really quickly. And even if I don't want to excel release, so let's say I want to get a level 3 on this bend, or even just a level 2. I can get that level 2 off, and as long as I'm in a spot where there's a little bit of a straight, you can actually easily course correct your line. So even though this is a bend here, one of the big things is that this bend does have a straight. Now, it doesn't look like it because, again, it is a bend, but if you look closely, this actually has a straightaway where you can, with higher handling, release a drift boost, and that's what I did. I released my drift boost as soon as I hit the straight, and it allowed me to still maintain a really good line. Now, granted, I still took this line, for lack of better terms, pretty, awkwardly. But for the most part, if I were to take this line, again, perfectly, where I maintained this kind of line here, drove here, got the drift boost off right here, this line would still hold true, and I would still maintain this kind of line here. And again, Excel releasing is something that is definitely one of the better things in the game to do, but one of the big things is that you don't have to do it, and you can do this without Excel releasing, and I'll show you real quick. So let's go to the Wonder Museum Spiral again. So Wonder Museum Spiral, again, I'm holding my accelerator the whole way through, is able to take that line pretty good. Unfortunately, I did bump, so that's really bad. But again, the goal is not to bump if you can. So again, I can take this line perfectly, I'm holding full Excel, not even slowing down for even a nanosecond. And again, we'll go back to this line. So I'll start this line in a much better spot. And if I release this drift boost, even with the fact that I released it and I got that speed, I did go a little wide. But that's what happens when you have higher handling. You're able to get away with it and not slam into the wall, because for other cars, they would slam into that wall and lose a ton of time. But even with that, that is still a bad time to release my drift boost, and it showed with the fact that I almost slammed into the walls. But I still wanted to showcase that you can get away with it, because having higher handling does allow you to get away with quite a few things that you would otherwise not be able to. But again, when you're using your drift boost and releasing them, you have to figure out when you can, so that way you don't slam into walls, because if you slam into walls when you release a drift boost, you lose a lot of time, you lose rings, and in general, that gives your opponents time to catch up to you. It is something that you as a player have to kind of learn how to deal with. You have to kind of learn how to go about it. Let me go back to that lower handling combo real quick with 29 handling. So going back to this lower handling combo where I have 29 handling, let's talk about this. So with my drifting lines, again, I can start an immediate line, but I would have to accel release because I started it at a weird time. But even with these lower handling combos, you can still corner like this very easily. It's just about when you release your drift boost, when you start your drift, things of that nature. And again, you don't have to employ accel releasing by any means. Now, I do it because it's really beneficial for power cars, because power cars can take big advantage of it. But even without it, you can still take really, really solid lines that you otherwise wouldn't be able to take if you actually were full accelerating, or if you were actually releasing your drift boost at weird times. So it's something you do have to keep in mind. Otherwise, you will put yourself in a much worse spot. So again, right here on this bend, even though I didn't release my accelerator, I still was able to take that mostly good. Now, that doesn't mean that's always going to hold true, but it's something to keep in mind, because you do want to pay attention to where and when you release your drift boost. So here, I can't release my drift boost, so I got to take this inside, and then I can release it. So again, right here, I can't release this drift boost, but I can release it after. So the timing at which you start your drifts is so incredibly important, and when you release them. Without knowing when and where to start your drifts and when and where to release them, you will never get lines like these. These are things that you have to start practicing and understanding. So again, the lower handling you have, the earlier you have to actually start your drifting lines in order to get consistent lines, such as with higher handling combos. But with higher handling, that means the later you can release drift boost and the later you can start lines. So with me, see, since I had to start my line a lot sooner, if I would have started just a smidge later, that would have been a perfect line. But again, this is something you have to keep in mind with higher handling combos versus lower handling combos, and in general, when you're driving, you need to know when you actually need to start and stop drift boost. So again, right here, can't release this, but after the bend, I can. And then if I charge this drift boost up, I can release it. But you see how, again, if I release it too early, I get pushed due to momentum. If I release it a little bit sooner than normal, I can get away with it and still maintain that speed through a bend. It is something you have to keep in mind, and you have to fine-tune to your playstyle, and not only that, fine-tune to what the vehicle's needs are. You cannot get away with just releasing drift boosts and starting drifts whenever you want. You have to fine-tune these. A lot of players get into the wrong mindset of actually trying to drive and spend their resources, aka their drift boost, way earlier than they're supposed to, or way later than they're supposed to. And because of that, you either lose speed on the bend, or instead of taking the bend as tight as possible, you actually get sent wide, just like in the previous examples. That is something very important with drifting lines in general, and that's something very important with driving lines in general. You have to understand when you can get your driving lines off, drifting lines off, drift boost off, things of that nature. And a lot of players do not know this. The big thing I can tell you is, the lower your handling is, the sooner you have to start your drifting lines, and the sooner you have to release your drift boost before or after a bend. Now, again, there is a lot of stuff that you have to pay attention to. Like, what if you have a back-to-back bend, like on Roulette Road? Then you have to hold that drift boost all the way till you get to the straightaway of Roulette, and then you have to restart a line very wide on the left. If you are a higher handling combo, you can actually get away with starting your drift a little bit in the middle of the line and actually take an inside line, and that's just a perk of having higher handling. But again, it is something you have to kind of learn yourself. But for lack of a better terms, in general, when you have lower handling, you need to release your drift boost after a bend, not before it usually. Now, if you have a straightaway before a bend, you have to release it at least about 1.5 to 2 seconds before the bend. Now, it sounds weird to say that, but as I showcased where I released my drift boost a little too late, and it was still like only about a second away from the bend, I still was sent wide because of my momentum due to the drift boost. That's what lower handling unfortunately does have to suffer. But with higher handling, you're allowed to actually do that drift boost and release those right like about a second before the bend very easily and get those off very consistently, and you don't have to sacrifice your drifting line, and you can still take every line as tight as possible. And it's something that is highly important to learn, highly important to understand, and in general, it's very, very important to practice. Now, without further ado, that's all I got for you today, guys. Hopefully this driving lines for dummies video helped you guys out to understand why you might be messing up your lines. Again, for a lot of players, this is like common sense. But for a lot of lower level players that use lower handling combos, you might be wondering, why do you keep running into walls? Why do you keep failing your drifts? Why do your drift boosts send you so wide out? There's a lot of reasons behind it. Again, lower handling means your drift boost momentum actually carries you further, and it takes a lot longer for your car to actually adjust to the fact that you have all that momentum pushing you forward. Whereas with higher handling combos, that drift boost momentum actually gets canned off, and you're able to, well, it doesn't get canned off. That drift boost momentum is much more minimal, and you're able to control it much easier. So keep that in mind. Lower handling, you're going to have to start your line sooner. You have to release your drift boost much sooner before a bend, or you have to wait till after the bend so you don't mess up your line. And with higher handling combos, you're able to start your lines kind of whenever you want for the most part, but there's a lot of freedom with higher handling. You can release drift boost on some bends and get away with it, and in general, you can also use higher handling to not have to deal with the same drift momentum that lower handling combos have to deal with. You're able to release drift boost right before bends and still take that bend with an optimal line. It's very cool in general, and it's something that's very important to understand. But with that, that's all I got for you guys today. Have yourselves a great one. I'm going to be working on finishing up the next 2 videos. Hopefully, I'll get these out to you much sooner than every 5 days. School's been very brutal. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something.